Hello, everybody. Dr. Stu Hoffman, President of ChiroSecure. The intent of this show is to offer up some information to you on what happens when the stroke issue rears its ugly head. What is the proper way to respond? Utilizing the literature that's available to us and not to just let our emotions get in the way of good, sound judgment. In fact, when we see an article appear or a news show appear that's attacking what we do as chiropractors and we know the information is false, do we just go and respond? I don't know about that. I think that we need to respond, but it needs to be based on sound information. So here we have an article published at Baylor University Medical Center, Dallas, vertebral artery dissection after a chiropractic neck manipulation. And they reference an estimated 1 in 20,000 spinal manipulations results in a vertebral artery aneurysm or dissection and ischemic infarct. We all know this is not true and the facts are absolutely wrong. So I asked Dr. Clum to come on again for us and walk us through the right way to go about letting the university and the author know that their article referenced statistics that are incorrect and not at all based on current research and literature that we have so readily available. So I want to bring Dr. Clum on, and our goal is to get inside your head, Dr. Clum, and understand how you approach these situations, because you did respond to this on numerous occasions, and I know that's what you're going to bring us up to speed on. And how do you decide when to respond and ultimately what to expect the outcome to be? So can you tell us first, how did you even learn about this article from Baylor?
Thanks, Stu. I appreciate it very much, and it's great to be with you again today. The Baylor article came to light in a very odd fashion. There was a news, or not a news piece, but a promotional piece that was produced by the Baylor University Medical Center last year. And it was talking about their neurology department and their helicopter air flight service and that sort of thing. And they used the example of a case of a woman who had a vertebral artery dissection. And the chiropractor, she was in a chiropractor's office. She had the vertebral artery dissection, and it was recognized. The chiropractor took the appropriate steps, made the appropriate emergency calls. The woman wound up going to the Vanderbilt University Medical Center by way of their ambulance service. The neurology folks did their job. It had a very good outcome, and the woman returned to her family and to her life, and essentially it was a feel-good story for everybody from Vanderbilt's perspective. And in that article, they made reference to this 1 in 20,000 number that you just spoke of. And while I understood, I thought I had had an understanding of where they came up with that number, I also understood that number that appeared in the literature to have been an opinion piece. Well, I contacted Vanderbilt, and sure enough, Vanderbilt said, yeah, we got that from this article in Baylor that you referenced at the start of the discussion today, Stu. And I said, thank you. Went back to Baylor and asked them about it. First reviewed the article carefully. And the first step in the process was, in reviewing the article, if you understand the literature and so on, and you see the references that they're making in the artery, are the references being applied properly? Well, in this case, they weren't. And the references in the article that they had tied to their assertion that an adjustment resulted in a dissection in 1 in 20,000 cases was completely inaccurate. So at first step, I wrote them and pointed out the fact that the evidence they offered, i.e. the reference, didn't support the statement they were making. And they wrote back And they said, thank you. We appreciate you pointing out the error. We'll change the reference. We did, in fact, make a mistake on it. And this is what we based it on. And they based it on a 1989 article from the British Medical Journal by an author by the name of Vickers. And the unfortunate part of the Vickers article is that it's an entirely opinion-based statement. There's no data, there's no study, there's no control group. It's just an opinion. And it's kind of like, Stu, you know, how often do people move to Phoenix? 100 a day. Well, you don't know that, and you don't have any basis to say that. There are people that do know that and can tell you that number probably down to the family. But you don't know it when you say that. And this number was tossed out, this 1 in 20,000, as an opinion piece. And all of a sudden, it gained a life of its own. And then Baylor came back and they said, yeah, and by the way, there's 2 other pieces of literature that we also like to add to this discussion. And they came out of Australia. And one was by a fellow by the name of Dunn. That was in 1990. And then there was another by a fellow by the name of Mann. Well, when you looked at all 3 of them, you soon realized that they got into this circular argument where each used the other to reinforce its opinion. Mann relied on Vickers, and Dunn relied on Mann and Vickers. So this thing starts to have a life of its own, where this number of 1 in 20,000 pops up, and then it gets reinforced by the next person using it, and the next person using it, and nobody goes back and say, hey, wait a minute, that's just an opinion piece. And in 1989, that may have been the best available at the moment, but the bottom line was it's certainly in 2016, when this was written, let alone 2017, it's certainly not the best available today. So the next level of the discussion with Baylor was to point out the literature that's evolved since then, going on, starting with Rothwell in 2001 in stroke, moving on to Cassidy in 2007 in spine, moving on to Kozloff in 2015, and then moving on to Church in 2016, and how absolutely inconsistent their data-driven numbers were with this 1 in 20,000 piece. Well, bottom line was they really weren't interested in the discussion. And they,
Dr. Clum, let me ask you first, you know, when did you even make a decision to even approach them on this? And what were we actually looking for as a result of that?
The decision to pursue it was based upon the fact that the Vanderbilt was running with this number as as I said before, in a promo piece for their own facility. And it was, you know, members of the chiropractic community in Tennessee were really at risk and being disadvantaged by the fact that a very prominent and major university in their area was promoting inaccurate data. And in an attempt, naively thinking on some level, that, well, if we put the right numbers in front of them, obviously they'll default to the right numbers. Well, that wasn't the case. They backed up and they said, well, this came from Baylor, and so on. So, and then once I got on the track of it, I kind of became I don't know, I don't want to go as far as to say an obsession, but I became irritated about the way they were approaching it, and just stayed on it to try and run it to ground to get it corrected. Quite honestly, I talked with a number of people that are active in this area in and around the discipline, and they all laughed and they said, well, don't expect it to change. And I said, well, you know, it's a Don Quixote moment. We'll tilt at the windmill a little bit and hope that we can change the course of the culture in that regard. And in the final analysis, we didn't. But the point of this discussion today is for our colleagues and your listeners to understand how a bad number that's based on nothing but opinion can grow legs, get embedded into the literature, and move forward. And if they know how and where that number came from, They can undermine conclusion that are drawn on that number or based on that number, and set the record straight and put the potential risk, not verified risk, but potential risk in context in relationship to other activities in healthcare. So this became a process of how can we, first of all, if we could change the hearts and the minds of the authors, great. If we could change the record, even better. And if we could come to an agreement, fantastic. None of those things happened. But it's a great opportunity to point out to the practicing chiropractor that how this stuff gets started, how it gets sustained, and what they can do to deal with it.
You know, I think that something that you said is really important, but I want to shift it a little bit. I know that you've gone back and forth with them on numerous occasions at this point, and to date, nothing has mattered. And, you know, you won't ever say it, but I will. You know, we have to assume that's a professional / political agenda, because why would you ignore all of the overwhelming documentation that you researched, you recited in terms of what's been going on in this stroke awareness over the last 15, 20 years. And the references that you cited are so in contrast to these numbers. How could they just simply ignore it if they didn't have their own motivation? And I'm not asking you to even respond to that. That's just my point of view on it. But is there more to this that we're waiting on? Is there more to it that we can do? Because, as I said, I know you've gone back and forth, not just with Baylor, but with Vanderbilt also, and so far, really more of a stonewall.
Well, that's true. And in terms of next steps, the only thing that we can do at this point is be diligent. You know, throughout early on in these discussions relative to this whole subject area, Alan Terrett in Australia produced a magnificent monograph where he went back and he researched every single piece of literature that had made reference to a chiropractor related to a stroke. And he found right off the bat that more than half of them, a chiropractor was never involved. So the first thing we need to do is we need to study the literature that comes out on this subject and hold the authors accountable to what they say. You know, the other more recently than Alan Terrett's work, Adrian Wenbaum in Europe at the Barcelona College, which, by the way, was accredited over the weekend, and we're very happy for Adrian and his colleagues in Barcelona. Adrian has run to ground a number of misstatements from different authors, particularly in Europe, and has been able to get letters of correction into the literature. The whole goal of this process is to get more information, more correct information into the literature to be able to offset and to begin to erode the garbage literature from decades ago that still pops up, like the Vickers piece. The Vickers assumption, again, purely a guess. But as you noted, in the literature that I talked about, from Rothwell to Cassidy to Kozloff and on to Church, they all have good, solid, case-controlled, case crossover data upon which epidemiological conclusions can be drawn. And when you have that data and you draw those and you look at those conclusions, they are light years apart from that 1 in 20,000 discussion of Vickers. So the goal in this process is to bring a focused point of view to the author that wrote the piece that you have concerns with, to get it into the literature, to get a correction statement in there, that whenever that's used, we have something else to make reference to, and not let a misstatement perpetuate on its own without response. Now, if you're not the editor of that journal, you don't control what's going to go into that journal. But if we don't speak up, we know for a fact it'll never get corrected. So the process that from my side that I've been involved in, and many others have been, is how can we keep the authors honest in relationship to what they write about us and the incidence data and so on. And from the practitioner side, the value is that when they're confronted with a number, they need to understand that there's a way to deal with it and put it in context that is logical, rational, data-driven, and evidence-based, as opposed to being opinion-based.
When I'm out, including this last weekend, talking to a number of doctors about, the whole stroke blame game, and some of them will say to me, well, I'm an activator doctor, it's irrelevant, which is interesting because this last week we had an article come out about documenting an activator adjustment causing a vertebral artery dissection and stroke. And in fact, I've been in touch with Arlen Fuhrer about that, and he's doing exactly what you did in this situation. He's starting that process of responding to them with information that is relevant, utilizing research, some that he's done and some that we've even talked about on here. And I think it's very important that the doctors know that this information that comes out will get in the hands of every attorney in the country. And when that happens, it's another thing that we have to deal with to overcome whenever you are accused wrongly of causing an actual dissection and stroke. Now, some of the doctors are very appreciative of that because they either have had their own experience or know someone that has. But a lot of people don't realize how close this hits to home. And one of the examples that I've given a number of times is one of the claims, unfortunately, that we've taken in was an older woman that came into the doctor's office just filling out paperwork, and they see that she's not okay. They call 911. She winds up going to the hospital. They're saying it was a stroke and she died. Well, no one in the family knows what was going on. They called it, a chiropractic stroke. But in the end, she never saw the chiropractor. She never even finished filling out her paperwork. But the fact that she merely came from the chiropractor's office just like this led to a lot of assumptions. And based on those assumptions, the family sues the chiropractor for causing her stroke and death. And we have to understand that this is an attack, whether we like it or not, and we need to utilize information that is credible and just responding, which is what I want to get to. Just responding, no, that doesn't happen, no this, no that, and being, having it be an emotional response does not work. And we need to utilize some of the references like you cited earlier, and we have almost all of those in our informed consent packet already for the doctors to familiarize themselves with and be able to educate rather than defend. But that's what my concern is with the doctors being able to understand that this information, when it comes out, it can be very far-reaching. It may not hit home for them personally or for them today, but it's something that we as a profession will have to deal with if it's not corrected for a long time to come.
That's correct. That's correct. And I mean, the one of the great things of the moment that we're living in is the capacity that the internet provides us. And the problem is that there's no filter on it. There's no truth panel on the internet that says, this is true, this is false. It's just up there. Now, that's one part of it on the public side. On the more scientific side, when you go to something like PubMed, and that's where that attorney that you're talking about is going to go, they're going to find these case studies. And the reality is that case studies cannot be used to establish causation, nor can they be used to cause rates of incidence of a given circumstance or problem. That would be like you and me saying, Stu, the last 3 people that I had come through the office had headaches, and they were completely resolved after one adjustment. Therefore, 100% of headaches resolved with one adjustment. Well, that's asinine. We wish that were true, but that's not the reality of the world. The same thing happens in the literature out there, is that when people run with a case study, positively or negatively, if we as chiropractors assert because we have a patient that had a great resolution of a problem of a given nature, and we run with that and say chiropractic can address this, that's as wrong as them running with it and saying chiropractic can cause this in the other direction, in the negative direction. So we need to be careful how we're behaving on our side of the aisle. And then at the same time, we need to hold them accountable on their side of the aisle. The articles that I made reference to before, the Vickers, the Dunn, and the Mann, none of them have the epidemiological power to assert causation or incidence data or incidence of occurrence of dissection associated with, let alone caused by, a chiropractic adjustment. So this house of cards gets built up with the improper use of substandard data that has to be displaced by proper data that's properly used. And that's the discussion that we're talking about today. So you're absolutely right that once things get into the literature, they do take on a life of their own, and we have to deal with it. For example, the case that you made reference to relative to activator care, I had a chance to review that article, which was really quite interesting. But if I'm understanding it properly, they're suggesting that an elderly woman had a hemorrhage in her occipital lobe as a result of an activator thrust at the cervical cranial junction. It's not even a vertebral artery dissection. They're saying that the activator through the skull caused a hemorrhage in the occipital lobe of the brain. Now, if it's a stretch, no pun intended, for an activator to cause a vertebral artery, how far do you have to stretch to think about an activator thrust or being applied to the cranial cervical junction, causing a dissection inside the brain, or a hemorrhage inside the brain? I mean, it's crazy making in that regard. It's not biologically plausible in any shape, form, or fashion. They did in the article say that they've never seen anything like this in history. Well, yeah, that's true, because it's Halley's Comet. It's going to come around once every 482 years or whatever. And it hasn't got anything to do with what you're wearing that day or who you went to or what you drank or what you ate. It's going to happen. Those things happen, and they need to be put in the proper context. So as our colleagues grapple with these things, I come across 2 attitudes. One, people that are overwrought with concern about this to the point that it becomes crippling and gets in the way of them living their professional lives and doing the good they can do. And the other end of the spectrum that blows it off completely. Well, the truth of the matter is, like most things, the truth is in the middle, and both ends are wrong. That's the perspective I think you and I would like to see our colleagues take, is that every single chiropractor should be intimately familiar with the literature that we've talked about today. And that when I talk about Rothwell or Cassidy or Kozloff or Church, they should know exactly what I'm talking about in detail. Now, that may sound unreasonable to some people. They may say, well, that's just not part of my world. Well, make it part of your world, because the challenges that come to us are best dealt with, best responded to with the information that those articles carry and convey. You need to know what they say. You need to understand the methodology involved. You need to understand the implication relative to the epidemiology involved, and the power of those studies in relationship to a case study or a case series or something of that nature. The more we can get our colleagues to understand that, the old story that we were taught since we were kids: the best defense is a good offense. If we have the data, if we know what we have, we can use those tools in our play. And if we don't, then we're left with nothing but defense. And Lord knows we don't want that at all.
So I want to reiterate that this is about elevating our doctors' level of awareness, not elevating their fear. And that's exactly what I got from you, just a little different format. And I think on top of that, you know, I get the same when I'm talking to doctors all the time. And in fact, there was a doctor in the last week or so that contacted me because so many of our colleagues they assume this has nothing to do with them or their practice. But the more and more publicity that is out there about this, it is affecting every single practice, whether we are keeping our head in the sand, as you said, or not. And some of the doctors don't realize until someone does ask them a question. And this doctor contacted me, do I have any information about this, this, and this? And I sent the information that we had, but they wanted more specific. This particular situation was more to Katie May, that we've talked about at great lengths. And it was all because a patient's father, I believe it was, wanted more information. So this doctor, it's my opinion, felt that they needed more to prove to that one individual that we're okay. And, you know, we cite different things, even in our informed consent, things to demonstrate how ridiculously safe a chiropractic adjustment actually is compared to any other healthcare service that's out there. And part of my devotion and passion for bringing this information to the profession is because I don't want this information to one day overcome our colleagues and their practices, because it can if we don't do something about it and stay vigilant with each one of these things that come out. And so thank God someone like you does respond to Baylor and to Vanderbilt on the profession's behalf, but at least you did it based on the literature and clear, concise information. And that's what everyone should be utilizing. And if they don't have the tools for that, certainly bring to any of our attention things that you see out in the public. But you also said something about our own colleagues putting out information about, you know, I'll just pick one, neuropathy. And it's not to suggest that we shouldn't take care of patients suffering from neuropathy or diabetic neuropathy, but some of the promotion that we get to see simply says, hey, where medicine has failed, we can definitely make you better. And I'm exaggerating, but only a little bit. But those are the things that wind up going to our licensing boards, and then we complain that our boards are being unfair. And I've written about our boards being activist and some of the things I think are unfair, but not everything. We have to take responsibility, as you said, for what we're talking about, what we're writing, what we're putting out in the public, because it affects the entire profession, not just you as an individual. And I think that's where you touched on. So I appreciate your words on that, I guess is the long way of saying it. But where do we go from here? Is there any avenues left with this whole Baylor issue? Is there more back and forth? What's still available to us?
Well, I have, quite honestly, haven't thought into that far into it. You know, if you're suggesting, can we bring litigation against them? Can we complain to somebody? You know, that sort of thing.
I was indicating that, yes.
I don't believe that's a viable option. I don't believe that's you know, and I think that's as much as we want to do that, as much as we feel assaulted by their attitude and their perspective on some of these things. I'll be honest with you, the feedback came from them, and I'm paraphrasing this, but basically said, "Hey, listen, want us to make this this matter is 3 times longer than the original original article. We're not going to do that." So it came down to the length of the response was too much for the in comparison to the original article. Well, I mean, I was, dumbfounded by the idea that, well, if sometimes it takes a long time to explain a problem. And when you put the problem on the table and it takes a good bit of information to correct it so that it's understandable, why wouldn't we want to pursue this? I didn't understand there was a word limit to addressing these kinds of concerns. But relative to this, the real bottom line is that Stu Hoffman can respond to the things that come onto the table. Gerry Clum can respond to the things that come onto the table. Other people who have a good understanding of the literature can do the same thing. But we need to disseminate that knowledge base among the chiropractic community at large. And every chiropractor needs to take responsibility for being on top of this literature and understanding what it says and understanding, more importantly, what it means. And as you had said, one of the things that we do is that we want to get excited and agitated when we're confronted with something in our circle. And I would ask that as people do get angry and respond to those kinds of things, that they think about the logic and the rationale that they respond to concerns that they have in other disciplines. And are you applying the same standard to yourself that you're expecting of other people? And it leads to that circumstance you were talking about, where you wind up with a half-page ad in the morning newspaper as you open it up, that has a kernel of truth to it, but by the time you read and get through the entire ad, it's not a kernel, it's a whole ear of corn. And extrapolating out and making inappropriate assertions and conclusions, or allowing those to be made in the mind of the reader, is troublesome in time and is eventually going to come back and bite people in the butt. And then they wind up at your doorstep wanting help, or they wind up with me saying, "Will you come testify for me before the board," or whatever the case might be. So we need to be careful. The formula for the day is be diligent, pay attention to what comes across the table, and make sure that the information is countered and addressed. Number 2, pass it along to other people. Don't assume that because you saw it, everybody else saw it. Send it to you, send it to me. Make sure it gets into the discussion realm that we can begin to address it more formally. Is there an organizational response that you can make? Is there an institutional response that one of our educational institutions can make? So on. Those are the things that we have to do. And to the degree that we can do them effectively, we can impact this whole circumstance more efficiently.
Thanks, Dr. Clum. As always, I appreciate your insights. We share a lot of the same things as we cross paths around the country and on the telephone with doctors on a daily basis. For those of you that are watching that don't already utilize and have our informed consent packet, certainly go on to our Facebook and or our website. Sign up for our concierge service, request it. Please like us on Facebook and download our ChiroSecure app on your smartphone. But we will keep you up to date on any and everything that comes out. This last weekend, I was thanked by so many people for the information that we've made available to them that they wouldn't have had we not brought it to the forefront. So we have people like Dr. Clum that is intimately involved in protecting doctors from reading, understanding, and responding to issues like the Baylor article that came out. So we're thankful for him, and we appreciate all of you for participating in staying in tune with what we have to offer. But as Dr. Clum said, please read the articles, understand it, and then you could pass along information to your patients and your community that's based on actual research rather than emotion. And that's what we want to convey to you. So thank you and have a great day.